I'll start off with this sort of statistic, which suggests that I think it's probably an underestimate, actually, perhaps particularly an underestimate at Cambridge, but this idea that a large proportion of undergraduate students, at least, and probably students in earlier years education, rely almost exclusively on sort of last-minute cramming for their exams, for doing well in their exams. And this is something that I'm sure you know better than me. And it's been going on for years, and students, when they're questioned about why they do this, think that this is an efficient strategy to use. I think this is a strategy that has served them well in the past and is a strategy that they should continue to adopt. There are, of course, downsides to using a strategy like this, which can have detrimental consequences, both physical and for your mental health as well. But perhaps even more importantly, cramming, repeating information over and over to yourself in the way that students do when they're going over textbooks or lecture notes or whatever it might be, is actually not by any means the most effective learning method to use for either relatively short-term or indeed long-term retention. And I'll present some evidence to support that conclusion, and also to suggest some more effective strategies that students, for example, might choose to adopt. First of all, though, a little bit of sort of background, and I may be, telling you something you already know with all this sort of information. So do sort of feel free to nod off if it's not useful. But there's lots of of models of memory out there, and models of the relationship that might exist between different memory systems. This model by Atkinson and Shiffrin is extremely prominent, and although a number of its predictions are now considered to be sort of oversimplifications, it still forms the basis of many models of memory that are around today. And it was one of the first to sort of suggest the differentiation between multiple forms of memory. So the idea that there might be stores that register information. Everything that you see, for example, might go into a very, very short-term visual store. Everything that you hear goes into a very, very short-term auditory store. And we're talking about stores that last for maybe a second or even less than a second. And it's only if you choose to attend to something in the visual environment, for example, that information will go from one of those very, very short-term stores into what Atkinson and Shiffrin termed the short-term store. So this idea of attending to something in the visual environment means that it goes on to the next stage for subsequent processing. You can see something but not attend to it, and it will maybe last for a few milliseconds or a second perhaps, but then it will decay very, very rapidly and be lost. Information in the short-term store maybe lasts a few seconds. So that's the short-term store that we use if we're trying to remember a phone number, for example. We can, if we're looking something up in a phone book and then going over to the phone, that will be the short-term store that enables us to hold that information online for a few seconds. And the idea was, from Atkinson and Shiffrin's store, and this is something that's still central to models of memory today, is that if we want to keep information for longer than that few seconds, we have to use this process called rehearsal. And rehearsal is the process by which you either vocally, out loud, or sub-vocally in your head, repeat information to yourself over and over again. So if you're looking up a phone number in the phone book, and then you've got to walk over to your phone, you might say the phone number to yourself in your head as you're walking to the phone in order to try to retain it for longer than a few seconds. And information in that short-term store can be lost by displacement. So if, while you're going from looking up the pizza delivery company phone number and walking over to your phone, someone shouts that they want pepperoni on their pizza, you're probably going to have lost the phone number and have to go back and look it up all over again. So this rehearsal is an easily disrupted strategy, although it is the main, or according to the Atkinson and Shiffrin model, the main process by which information is retained in the long-term store. And once something's encoded sufficiently in the long-term store, it can be held for potentially many years. And of course, with all of these processes, with all of these different memory stores, each of them has several processes, several stages of processing, and these three are obviously the main ones, which is for information to be retained in the long term, it has to be encoded in a satisfactory manner, and I'll talk about what satisfactory means in a little while. It has to be stored somewhere within the long-term memory system, and it has to be retrieved in an effective way. You have to be able to find the information that you're looking for again when you're at the act of retrieval. And I'll talk a little bit about ways in which those different processes can be enhanced based on scientific evidence, empirical evidence. And I'm going to talk about a few different ways, a few different strategies that can be adopted. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these and just a little bit about some of them. And we'll talk a little bit about the relationship between these different processes and the brain that is presumably carrying out these different strategies. Now, don't know how much you know about the brain, but it's in the head, for most people at least. And there are a number of regions that have been known for a long time to be very, very important for memory. One of the main ones being the hippocampus, the medial temporal lobe system, which is in the middle of the brain, behind the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe runs sort of just around your ear and slightly in front here. So this is the main part of the temporal lobe. And inside that, in the middle part of that, the medial part of that, lies the hippocampal system here. And that's been known for 70 or 80 years now to be a very centrally important part of the memory system, from patients like patient HM, for example, who's one of the most famous patients in the literature, who had intractable epilepsy for many years until they carried out in the 1950s an experimental treatment of basically removing the hippocampus and surrounding tissue as a sort of experimental way of trying to get rid of the epilepsy, trying to relieve the symptoms. It was very successful in relieving the epilepsy symptoms, but there was this minor side effect that he was completely amnesic from then on. And he was studied for the sort of intervening 60 or 70 years or so until he died actually a couple of years ago. So we've known for a long time that that region is very important. And then with the advent of functional neuroimaging techniques like functional MRI, for example, we've learned also about other regions, for example, in the frontal lobes of the brain. So this is the region just behind your forehead. And we know particularly about the role that two regions play, which is the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So this is the sort of, the jargon for these sorts of brain regions. Ventral meaning, down below, and dorsal meaning up above, and then lateral meaning the lateral part of the brain, the outside part of the brain. So we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, the dorsolateral region being about here, and the ventrolateral being about here, down below that. And these regions have both been shown to play very important roles in these sorts of processes or strategies that I'm going to talk about. So practice then, this is the one that bears greatest relation with the sort of traditional strategy that people employ of rehearsing information over and over.